Hey church, welcome back to my living room as we continue our study through Genesis, having skipped a week as we had a meeting in our church, and I pray that that didn't keep you from studying your Sunday school lesson anyway. But if it did, for some reason, let me give you a quick background from where we were the previous week. We were in chapter 31, I believe it was, the previous time. And so that means that in chapter 32, excuse me, so that means that we have gone chapter 33, which is where Jacob actually meets up with Esau. Chapter 34 in Genesis, which is where Dinah, which is the only daughter of Jacob, is dishonored by Shechem, and then Levi and Simeon take it upon themselves to bring back honor, but in doing that, they wind up killing Shechem, taking advantage of a pretend covenant, and killing Shechem and all of their men in their families. And your title may say something about the Shechemites, Havites, some version of that, but it was all in an attempt to really take the honor of their sister back. Maybe a bit of an overkill, no pun intended. Was it really the right thing to do? Probably not. But you will see that the brothers of the sons of Jacob tend to overreact, which is really common back in those times. So that's chapter 34, where Dinah basically is raped, and then her brothers try to make up for that or take her honor back. In chapter 35, we find that Jacob returns to Bethel and has a renewal with God. That's where he gets his name Israel. God changes his name and renews that vow and renews that covenant with him. In chapter 35 is also where we have the death of Rachel and the birth of Benjamin, the last of the 12 tribes, the 12 sons. I shouldn't say 12 tribes because with what happens to Joseph, the 12 sons aren't necessarily the 12 tribes. We'll get into that later. But you have the death of Rachel in the birth of Benjamin. You also have the death of Isaac, the patriarch of the family. And so chapter 35 has a lot going on in that. Chapter 36 is the descendants of Esau, or the Edomites also, and it makes, if you're not sure if that's really the same people, at the very end in verse 30 or verse 40, 42, it says, "This is the family line of Esau, the father of the Edomites." So sometimes there's questions about all these mites or ites, who they belong to, but Esau is the father of the Edomites. So chapter 36 is that family. Chapter 37 is the turnaround, or the turning point, where we're not focused so much on Jacob as we turn our focus on Joseph, the oldest of Rachel and Jacob. Benjamin is the youngest. But Joseph is special, obviously, to Jacob, as he had him later in life. That was a son that he grew to love quite a bit because Rachel's the one he loved. And then Benjamin would come along and be special to him as well. But Joseph really held a special place in his heart, especially after this story when he thought he had lost him, right? But this is where our Sunday school lesson picks up, chapter 37, verse 5. And right before the verse that our Sunday school lesson picks up, it explains why some of the jealousy had already been in place. It is because Jacob, I'm going to get those two mixed up the whole time. Jacob did love him more because of that relationship with Rachel. And so when it says in the verses that this gave them the brothers another reason to hate him. It all stemmed from that idea that Jacob loved Joseph more. Jacob could have done a lot to avoid this by not showing preference to Joseph, but in fact he did. In fact, in verse 4, I believe it is, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word about him, meaning Joseph. So Jacob had a lot. He did a lot in his life, and this is another place where he could have done better and improved the situation. So this Sunday school lesson clearly is about jealousy. It's the jealousy of the brothers. It's the jealousy that they had toward Joseph. They had a big part of that, but the dad could have done, Jacob could have done something to better that. Your Sunday school lesson talks about jealousy and what it is. It talks about Shakespeare calling it the green-eyed monster. It defines it by Webster as being hostility toward a rival or toward someone believed to have an advantage that you don't have. It talks about Paul calling it a work of the flesh. All of those are descriptions of something that is not something that we want. But here's the thing that all those have in common. It is something that is wrong with the heart. If it wasn't for the heart, jealousy wouldn't be a thing. Consciously, we can tell ourselves, I'm not going to be jealous, but our heart desires it. It's that flesh. It is definitely a problem of the heart, and it is clear. It comes out in the story quite well. So let's dive into it and see what happens. We're going to be in chapter 37, verses 5 through 8 to start off with, right after that verse I just read to you. So the story goes like this. Joseph had a dream, and when he had told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more than just the father hating or loving Joseph more. Now the boys hated him even more because he was telling them this dream. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. That listen there is more of the command. So it's bad enough he had the dream. It's bad enough he wanted to tell him, but he said, you need to listen to me. Joseph could have done a better job at how he told him the story too. They're all at fault in this jealousy process. Jacob for loving this son more. The boys for having the jealousy anyway. And Joseph for how he presented this dream. But nonetheless, it's there. He said, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaths of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheath rose up and stood upright, while your sheaths gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. So he tells them, hey, I want you to listen to me. I had this dream. We were out in the fields and we were gathering our grain, and all of a sudden my grain just sprouted right up. And yours came and gathered around me. Yours wanted to gather around me and then bowed down. Now, there's several types of dreams. There's dreams that require a lot of interpretation, and there's dreams that just speak obviousness, right? And this is one of those. And so much so that the boys say, you mean to tell me that you expect us to bow down to you? Are you going to rule over us? I mean, the dream was so clear that they knew what it was saying, but they were just wanting to deny it. Now, what your Sunday school lesson doesn't do is the next dream. He had another dream that involved the sun, the moon, and 11 stars. And it said the same exact thing. In fact, let me just read it. Verse 9. It said, then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? Now, it says that his dad, Isaac, rebuked him, but listen to what it says in verse 11. His brothers were jealous of him but his father kept the matter in mind. So while his dad did rebuke him, it said that his father, let's put this away, and let's consider this at a future time. The boys only had hate for him, for Joseph. But the dad had a little bit of a smarticle moment there and said, let's think about this. It might actually have some bearing in the future. Remember, Jacob has walked with God through a lot of different things, to the point where God changed his name to Israel. And so he knows God can speak in mysterious ways. God can give dreams. He'd spoken to Jacob in a dream, in a vision. And so maybe my son's got this same quality. Rebuking him for the dream? Probably not. Rebuking him maybe for how he came across? Probably so. Like I said earlier, Joseph could have done a better job in how he came across. But should he have shared it? I don't know. In fact, your Sunday school lesson asked the question, what's the advantages and disadvantages of sharing your dreams or your ambitions? He had an opportunity to share what God was sharing with him. And that was good. Should he have done it? Probably so. Could he have done it in a better way? Probably so. But what happens if you don't share with people what God's doing in your life, what ambitions you have? Well, a couple of things. If you don't do it, how will you ever know, when you've arrived or when you've gotten there? When that marker is there. When will you ever know if you've ever stepped out on faith? If you never voice that ambition, you're never likely to actually step out and do it. But once you voice it, people can kind of hold you accountable for it. Or if you don't voice it, then when it does happen, people don't recognize that God was working in you and through you way back when. It can be dangerous, I guess, to step out in faith and say that something's going to happen. But the advantage of it is that you can see God working at the end of that. It takes a step of faith. And could Joseph have done it better? Yeah, we've already said that. But the good news is that when this all comes down at the end, they're going to be able to look back and go, oh my goodness, remember when? And they're going to be able to look back and go, that was God the whole time. Man, we should have been listening to him the whole time. And maybe you've experienced something like that in your life. I don't know. But we miss the opportunity when we don't step out on faith and say, I believe that God's telling me to do this. And then also you get the input of others that maybe are God-fearing people too. You'll probably get some advice from people that aren't. But the ones that are truly seeking God, they'll help you along that path. Don't be afraid to step out and share what God is putting on your heart. Sometimes that can be scary, but I encourage you to do it anyway. So I shared some of those verses that your Sunday school lesson skips over there in verses 9 through 11. And then verses 12 through 18 that they also skip is just talking about how Jacob sent Joseph out to check on his brothers. Not uncommon, he was the youngest one. Go check on your brothers, see what they're doing. Take them a sack lunch, whatever. Kind of like David was sent out to check on his brothers when they were in battle. Literally take them a lunch out there, and that was the case here. Now, in doing that, unknowingly, Jacob sent his son into harm's way. Did he mean to do that? No. But that's what happened. And we pick the story up in verse 18. Let's read verse 18 through 22. It says, but they saw him in a distance. And this is Joseph walking up on the boys. as they were out shepherding the flock. So, but they saw him in a distance, and before they reached him, they plotted to kill him. So their jealousy had led them with this mentality together to do something evil. Had they not had that jealousy, would they have gotten to this point? Probably not. They plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer, they said to each other. Come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. When Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. Let's not take his life, he said. Don't shed any blood. Throw him into a cistern here in the wilderness, but don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and take him back to his father. Reuben, remember now, is the oldest. He had a heart. Now he did some dumb things. We'll learn about some dumb things that he did later. But he still had this desire to kind of take care of the family name. Responsible. Not all the boys were bad. They just did bad things. He doesn't want to kill his brother. Maybe teach him a lesson. So his plan was, hey, don't kill him. Let's just throw him in a cistern. Cistern was a big hole in the ground used to hold water. But we learned later that this was a dry one, so maybe it was cracked. It didn't hold the water. Maybe it was a drought season. Didn't have water in it. But just to put him in there and leave him. Would he starve to death? Maybe. Would somebody come along and get him? Maybe. But they were just going to leave it to chance. But Reuben's plan was, when the other boys weren't looking, come get him and then take him back to his father. Now, what were the repercussions of that? Well, Joseph would have told everybody what would happen, because he'd already told on his, if you read verses 1 through 4, he'd already told on his brothers, hey, they're not doing their job. He would have told them what would have happened, but Reuben was willing to accept that. He was doing whatever he could to keep them from killing him, because they were already thinking, hey, we'll just say that some wild animals came and ate him up. This evilness that was in them, would they have done this if it was just one, if it was Levi or Simeon, But the problem was they had that mob mentality. One jealous person, not a bad problem. Two, maybe not a problem. But once you get 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7, you can talk each other into doing almost anything, and it's hard for one person to stand up. You got to like Reuben for this, being willing to stand up and do at least semi the right thing. It took a lot of guts for him to do this, but there was clearly a mob mentality. It goes on in verse 23, however, Reuben's plan didn't work out too good. Verse 23, it says, So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. So this was not only a well-planned out attack, it was ruthless. They stripped him of his robe, the special robe that his dad had given to him. I always think of Joseph in the Technicolor robe, but anyway. Stripped him of his robe, the ornate robe that he was wearing. And they took him and threw him in the cistern. The cistern was empty. There was no water in it. As they sat down to eat their meal, they looked up and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Now, this tells you how calloused or cold-hearted they were. After they threw him in the cistern, where they were just going to leave him, they sat down and ate. They really had no remorse about this. It's time to eat, guys. Now, as they did that, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites. Now, Ishmael was the son of Abraham, and these were the descendants of it. So they saw this caravan coming, and as they were sitting down, they saw an opportunity. So as the caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead, their camels were loaded with spices, balm, myrrh, and they went on their way to take them down to Egypt. So they saw an opportunity, take advantage of it. Why not make a little bit of money? Judah, of all people, Jesus is a descendant of Judah. You don't think about him being the instigator. But again, they weren't all bad boys. They were just boys that did some bad things. Judah said to his brothers, What will we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites. and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." His brothers agreed. So, whether or not he did this really to make money, or he was kind of like Reuben and having second thoughts, doesn't really matter. The point is, he wasn't willing to kill him. So there is some goodness in him. I keep going back to that. They're not bad boys, they just do bad things. His brothers agreed. So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites, who took him to Egypt. If you continue to read the story, it's almost as if Reuben wasn't there, because when Reuben came back around, he still thought Joseph was in the cistern, and he was like, "What happened?" So obviously they weren't all sitting down to eat together. They weren't all in on the selling of the brother. It was maybe a few that drove the idea. And you can imagine the heartache that one brother had whenever his plan to save his brother Joseph couldn't be done. But the problem was, he didn't do enough to save him at the beginning. So good intentions didn't work out. Did he have the right heart? Maybe so. This is a tough case, because you have some of the brothers that stopped their brother from being killed, but they didn't do enough to bring him home safely. So they're stuck with the guilt, and they would be until that fateful day whenever Joseph was able to bring them all back together years later. But it's a reminder to us that even though it's very, very hard to stand up and do the right thing, you must try your best, because you don't know if you're going to get another opportunity to sneak around and pull your brother up out of the cistern. It may be too late. What possesses a person to do the things that they did to their own brother? The selfishness, the jealousy. Jealousy is a hard one, because it's a condition of the heart. They let that jealousy rule their heart and do things they probably wouldn't have done on an ordinary day. We can't let that do that to us. And the only way to prevent that is to get rid of jealousy as quickly as possible, not let it fester. If Reuben had cut that jealousy off at the very beginning, and being the oldest, he probably could have stopped it from the very beginning instead of waiting until it was too late. Maybe Judah could have done the same. Judah was the fourth oldest. He could have stepped in there too. But again, it was too late. Folks, cut jealousy out as quickly as possible so that we don't make those decisions down the road that are hard to recover from. Let me pray for us. Father in heaven, I thank you for this day. I thank you for the privilege of studying your word from those long ago that make the same mistakes that we do today. But may we learn from them and maybe make fewer of them and make them in such a way that we can recover quicker. But our goal is, Father, that we don't make them at all. May we look at your word, learn, and be better. And I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. Well, folks, as always, I pray that you study, that you're ready on Sunday, that you're making your input as we study together. And then, of course, we worship together as well. May you have a blessed weekend. See you on Sunday. Bye-bye.